Good morning. In today's class, we will talk about conversational styles. Conversational style. Now, uh, not all people use the same way of speaking, or we have different types of conversational styles. For example, some people expect that the participant in a conversation is very active and that speaking in this conversation is fast or will be fast with almost no pausing between turns and with some overlap or even completion of the other's turn. So in many situations, in many uh, social groups, people speak very fast and they allow overlapping, and it could happen that one speaker takes the other person's turn. Now, in other situations, or this type of conversational style is called high involvement style. High involvement style. So when people speak very fast or when they exchange utterances very quickly, they are using a high involvement style. So why is it called the high involvement style? Because both speakers are involved in the conversation and they seem to be very obsessed in what they speak. Now, do we have other styles? Yes. There is another style in which speakers use a lower rate and expect longer pauses between turns, and they do not overlap. That is, they do not interrupt each other, and they avoid interruption or completion of the other's turn. This non-interrupting or non-imposing style has been called a high considerateness style. That is, it is a style that is full of respect to the other person. It seems to be formal style or a very polite way of interaction. So in short, we have different styles depending on the social group or in the speech community that we are talking about. And when a speaker who uses one of the styles, I mean the high involvement style, gets into conversation with a speaker who uses a high considerateness style, um, the talk tends to become one-sided so that the interactants do not understand each other very easily. So there is a likelihood for misunderstanding. We say that the conversation becomes one-sided. The active participation style, I mean the high involvement style, will tend to overwhelm the other style. Neither speaker will necessarily recognize that it is the conversational style that are slightly different. So they the speakers clash with each other, they do not understand each other, and they become one-sided, but many of them do not explain why the other party does not respond to the first party smoothly. So the reason for the use of, or the reason why they misunderstand each other is because they have different styles. So the more rapid fire speaker or the speaker who uses language very quickly may think the slower paced speaker just doesn't have much to say, is shy, and perhaps boring or even stupid. But the other party who uses language very slowly may say that, or is likely to say, or is likely to be viewed as noisy, pushy, or domineering, selfish. I mean, the person who uses the language very quickly. So the person who uses a rap, or who has who is considered as rapid fire speaker is viewed as noisy, pushy, domineering, selfish, and even tiresome. Features of conversational style will often be interpreted as personality traits. Now, this is related to the speaker's personality, and it's related to his or her culture. Now, adjacency pairs. Despite differences in style, most speakers seem to find a way to cope with the everyday business of social interaction. So people may have different styles, different conversational styles, but they are likely to find a way to cope with the everyday business of social interaction. So, I mean, they can have the right responses to different social expressions. So whether they use the rapid fire style, or whether they are rapid fire speakers or slow speakers, they know that a greeting will elicit a response to a greeting, and that a compliment will elicit something like thanking token, uh, um, or an acceptance response. So, despite differences in style, there are many situations in which the speakers cope with everyday business of social interaction. I mean, with social interactions. So speakers are likely to provide automatic responses to many expressions which require formulaic responses. So look at these examples: greetings and goodbyes. So Anna says hello, and Bill says hi. In other words, the social expression or the speech act of greeting hello will usually usually elicit or extract a response like hi, regardless of whether the speaker uses the high considerateness style or the high involvement style. And if Anna says, "How are you?" Bill is likely to say, "Fine." And when Anna says, "See you," Bill will say, "Bye." So these are automatic responses that are produced regardless of the conversational style that has been chosen by the speaker. Now, these automatic sequences are called adjacency pairs. Adjacency pairs. That is, one speech act requires or elicits or extracts another speech act in most situations, regardless of whether you speak language slowly or you speak it quickly. regardless of the conversational style that you are using. So they are adjacency pairs are always or always consist of a first part and the second part. So hello is the first part and the second part is hi. And how are you is the first part and fine is the second part. Now, the utterance of the first part immediately creates an expectation of the utterance of the second part of the same pair. Failure to produce the second part in response will be treated as significant absence or and hence meaningful. So, if any person who receives hi, hello does not respond by saying hi, or if anyone who receives how are you does not respond by saying fine, this is meaningful, which means that this is done for a certain social reason, maybe because the other party does not or is angry, sorry, because the second party is angry at the first party, or be for a reason or another. يعني هاي الكلمات إذا واحد أدى التحية وما رديت عليه بيكون له أسباب اجتماعية. Now, why? Because the first speaker has used an adjacency pair, which means that there is a first part which must be completed by the second part. If it is not completed by the second part, this has a social reason. So there is substantial variation in the forms which are used to fill the slots in adjacency pairs as shown in 11, but there must always be two parts. Now, when somebody says to you hello, you might say hi, you might say something else. This is an English speaking country. واحد بيقول hello ممكن تقول wow, how are you, or maybe welcome, or hello. So hello might elicit hello, and how are you might elicit fine, or might elicit or may actually extract great. And see you, the other party may say see you. So now these are called adjacency pairs because there is a first part and the second part, but there is often variation in the use of the first part and the second part. What I mean by variation تنوع، يعني أحيانا see you مش دائما بيكون الإجابة إلها باي. It could be see you. And how are you مش دائما تكون الإجابة fine, it could be something else. Now, so there is substantial variation in the forms which are used to fill the slots in an adjacency pair, as shown in example 11, but there must always be two parts. Look at this first part. What's up? The second part is nothing much, but it's likely to have other responses. How is it going? Just hanging in there. And depending on the nature of the situation, the response is likely to vary. How are things? The usual. So this is one possible response for how are things. Yani the usual is one possible response to how are things, but there are other possible ones. And as I have just said, there is variation depending on the social group and depending on the nature of the situation in which the conversation occurs. Now, the examples in number 11 are typically found in opening sequences of a conversation. Other types of adjacency pairs are illustrated in 12, including a question answer sequence like a 12A and the thanking response and a request accept. So the first part of what time is it is about 8:30, about or time. Thanks, So what's the typical response for the first, for thanks? The typical response is you are welcome. And could you help me with this? What's the typical response? It's sure. And some people might say, I am busy. So depending on the situation, I still say that you must remember that the second part often involves variation. So there is often variation in the use of the second part. So not all first parts immediately receive their second parts, however. It often happens that a question answer sequence will be delayed while another question answer sequence intervenes. The sequence will then take the form of question 1, question 2, answer 2, answer A. Now ممكن واحد يسألك سؤال وانت تفكر بالإجابة، بعدين يسأل كمان سؤال وانت تفكر في الإجابة، فتزود الإجابة الأولى، الإجابة الثانية قبل الأولى، وبعدين so this is question 1. ممكن تكون محادثة، سؤال واحد، سؤال question 1 question 2 then answer 2 answer 1 with the middle pair question 2 and answer 2 being called insertion sequence. Now question 2 and answer 2, which are in the middle of the conversation, are called insertion sequence. Although there appears to be a question in response to a question 1, the assumption is that once the second part, which is A2 of the conversation, of the insertion sequence is provided, the second part A1 of the initial question, question 1, will follow. This pattern is illustrated in number 13. Now agent asks, do you want the yearly flight? This is the first question. هذه في محادثة، مثال على محادثة. Now the client says again, what time does it arrive? So the agent says, do you want the yearly flight? And the client says, what time does it arrive? Now the agent says 9:45 and the client says, yes, that's great. So the client's question, what time does it arrive, is followed by the agent's response 9:45. 9:45. So this is called insertion sequence. لأنه هاي الإجابة اللي هي 9:45 هي جاي للسؤال الثاني مش للسؤال الأول. أما إجابة السؤال الأول, do you want the yearly flight? The answer for this question is yeah, that's great. So an insertion sequence is one adjacency pair within another. Although the expressions used may be question answer sequences, other forms of social action are also accomplished. مش دائما بتكون هي سؤال وإجابة، ممكن تكون other types of contributions. Other forms of social action are usually achieved within this pattern. Look at example number 14, in which there is a pair which consists of making a request, accepting the request. This is question number 1 and answer number 1 with an insertion sequence of a question answer pair, which is question 2 and question 3, which seems to function as a condition on the acceptance A1 being provided. Look at the conversation. Now Jane says, could you mail this letter for me? الإجابة لهذا السؤال هي الحقيقة okay. لكن إجا بينهم شيء اللي هو بنسميه insertion sequence. تخللهم سؤال وإجابة. Does it have a stamp on it? And Jane says yeah. فكانت إجابته أوكي هي لأول سؤال أو لأول طلب which is a request. So the request receives an acceptance which is okay. لاحظوا إنه المسافة بينهم قريبة يعني مش بعيدة جدا فلذلك the conversation makes sense. If they are very far from each other, the conversation will not be sensical. Now, the delay in acceptance in example number 14 created by the insertion sequence is one type of indication that not all first parts necessarily receive the kind of second parts the speaker might anticipate. فإذا هذا بنتوقعه في أي محادثة إنه مش دائما بيكون الادجيسنسي بير متتابع، أحيانا بيكون متباعد depending on the situation. So delay in response symbolically marks potential unavailability of the immediate expected answer. ليش الناس بتتأخر؟ أحيانا لأنه الإجابة على السؤال ما بتكونش متوفرة 100%. So delay represents distance between what is expected and what is provided. Delay is always interpreted as meaningful. In order to see how delay is locally interpreted, we need some analytic terms for what is expected within certain types of adjacency pairs. Now, preference structures or preference structure. Adjacency pairs are not simply contentless noises in sequence. They represent social actions and do not all social actions are equal when they occur, and not all social actions are equal when they occur as second parts of some pairs. Basically, a first part that contains a request or an offer is typically made in the expectation that the second part will be an acceptance. An acceptance actually is structurally more likely than a refusal. The structural likelihood is called preference. So if you make a request, people will, so the preferred response to a request is compliance with the request. لازم نقول compliance with the request استجابة للطلب. Now, the preferred or the response of preference for a compliment is acceptance of the compliment. Now, the preferred response to an apology is acceptance of the apology, but this is the preferred response. But is it always the preferred response؟ دائما احنا بنجيب الإجابة المفضلة؟ لا، أحيانا ممكن الإجابة ما تكون هي الإجابة المفضلة. So the term is used to indicate a socially determined structural pattern and does not refer to any individual's mental or emotional desires. So the preference answer for invitation is to accept the invitation, but this does not cover all the possible responses to an invitation. It may be sometimes declined. So not all people have the or provide the same response. So the same response, and the responses or the second parts are usually tied to the individual's mental or emotional desires. So, in this technical use of the word, preference is an observed pattern in talk and not a personal wish. يعني لما نقول it's an observed pattern، هذا نمط احنا بنلاحظه بشكل متكرر، لكن هو مش الاستجابة الوحيدة. مثلا thanking، غالبا thanking بتبعها قبول للشكر، like welcome, like thank you. Like, so when you say thank you, most people will say welcome or okay. But are these the only responses that thanking might extract? No. So thanking could be followed by أنا so by an opt out، يعني ما حد بدون رد. ممكن إنه يتبعها شيء رفض، ممكن يتبعها negotiation answer، يعني واحد بيسألك على إيش بتشكرني etc. So preference structure divides second parts into preferred and dispreferred. So any first part expression might be followed by a preferred answer or a dispreferred answer. The preferred answer is the structurally expected next act. الشيء الإيجابي دائما المتوقع. And the dispreferred is the structurally unexpected next act. Look at this form. So assessment is likely to be followed by agree or disagree, but يعني which response is more is the preferred? The preferred is agree, and it is expected more than the disagree. The invitation elicits accept or refuse, but what is more which one is more expected? Accept, which is the preferred response. Offer is followed by accept or decline. Now the accept is more common than the decline. Now the the proposal or the suggestion is followed by or a preferred answer, which is agree or disagree. Which one is more expected or more likely to occur? The agree, and the request accept or refuse, etc. So this is the general pattern of preferred and dispreferred structures, and we can actually extend this pattern to other adjacency pairs. ممكن احنا نطوله هذا. في عندنا complement، في عندنا complaint، في عندنا كمان criticism، we have thanking, we have congratulation, many speech acts that involve fixed or specific adjacency pairs. So in considering requests or offers as first parts, acceptance is the preferred and refusal is the dispreferred second part. Examples 15a to d, the responses in each second part all represent preferreds. Thus, acceptance or agreement in the preferred second part response to a request 15a, an offer 15b, an assessment 15c, or a proposal 15d. Look at them. Now, number one, can you help me? Sure. So sure here is the preferred second part. But is it the only possible response? No, we have this preferred responses like no. And number B, want some coffee. And the response or the preferred response, the more expected response is yes, please. Isn't that really great? Yes, it is. So this is the preferred response, and maybe we could go for a walk. That would be great. So all of these are preferred responses. Now, to get a sense of how expected these preferred second parts are in the examples in 15, imagine to imagine each of the first parts being met with silence. We might say that in any adjacency pair, silence in the second part is always an indication of a dispreferred response. في هذول كلهم لو سألت واحد قلت له can I help you وما رد، معناته هو ما بده. Want some coffee وما لقيت and no you did not answer. ف this is a dispreferred answer. يبدو انه في فرق عندنا بالثقافة بين الثقافة English speaking community and Arabs. This is a really important point. احنا في عندنا قول انه السكوت علامة الرضا، لكن في الثقافة الأجنبية السكوت علامة الرفض. This is important. فإذا في cultural differences. يعني لو سألت واحد كان عندنا في العرب بدك قهوة وسكت، تجيب له القهوة؟ والله I am not sure. We need actually to investigate it. لكن ليش احنا بنقول السكوت علامة الرضا؟ This is something that may not be applicable to adjacency pairs. Now I will stop here today. This is enough for today, and next time we will talk about the rest of the material. لأنه إحنا لسه عندنا محاضرات بدنا نكمل فقط هذا الفصل. يعطيكم العافية.